Earthlings. So welcome along to yet another Still Alive, and we can confirm that we are. Although it's been a challenging day for both of us, so bear with us on that because we both had a few problems and stuff. You've had some catty problems, Ronnie.
Yeah, we got two of our cats are really quite poorly. One was one kind of has got serious kidney problems. She was spent most of the weekend in the vets on some sort of dialysis they had to give her, and she's on all special treatment now. And she went for a checkup today, and no sooner had I got back from taking her than one of our other cats kind of collapsed, sort of went off her legs, and then I had to take her back in, and they think that she might have had some kind of a stroke or something, and she seems a bit better now, but then she's on this medication as well. So the problem is our cats are all quite old, so they're starting to develop these health problems and stuff. So we just have to see how they go. But it's
they're a worry, all right. How many have you got?
Yeah.
How many have you got now, Ronnie?
Well, it's hard to say because we've got some. My mum-in-law's got some, and we sometimes look after cats for other people. But we've got, so the number kind of tends to vary.
Okay, they come and go, don't they?
Well, kind of, yeah. But we have got some that are sort of the permanent residents, and these ones that aren't very well, they are because our own ones are older.
Yeah, here's one that's not very well, but she's being awkward as well. So we're gonna be in for a cat show.
Yes, I might have one come and. I mean, even Misty, who is usually stars in this show. She comes with me. She's had to go to the vet because she's been chewing at the bottom of her legs, and which is often a flea problem, but they don't think it is fleas because they couldn't find any evidence of fleas, and she'd been treated for fleas. So once again, they don't really know what the cause of that is. So we've got to see how that develops.
Okay. Well, we'll do some intros.
Yeah.
Before we start, I think we ought to give a big shout out to the British Sabs because it's 2 days from the so-called glorious 12th, and it looked like they had a really good time of it, shutting down the grouse shoots. And
yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Yes, well done to them. I remember way back. Probably would have been in the 1970s when I used to go up to sab the grouse shoots on the. I think it was in Derbyshire on the moors up there.
Yeah, Peak District. Yeah.
One occasion, I had a bloke pointing a gun at me and threatening to shoot me, and I just said, "Go on, shoot me. You'll get life in prison."
We've all wanted to do it.
I'd actually get death, of course, when I said that. But his mates
to do it. Don't worry. We've all
his mates were saying to him, "Don't be a bloody fool. Put the gun down. Don't be a fool." And they made him put the gun down.
Don't be a fool, Gerald. Okay,
it was a bit like that. But I don't know. I was a bit foolhardy there, like kind of, saying that.
Anyway, welcome everyone to Still Alive. So Michael got here and said we're still alive. As usual, says something. Also, I was first. Now I've got some real bad news for you, Michael, because about 3.5 hours ago, AK put a couple of comments in about the deers. So
yes,
we'll come back to those. But so I'm afraid you're a bit beaten there. I'm afraid, Michael.
He gets the silver medal, Michael, this week.
Sorry about that. So Sophia, hello there. Deb is here. Whoops, I jumped over Andy, which is not easy to do. Tall lad. Okay, anybody else? Philip from New York. There's Jennifer. Hello there. Vegan Paul. I think we might have most people now. Yeah. Oh, is that about the Sabs? Yes, yes, they did really well this time, and of course, well, you tell me, Ronnie, grouse shooting is not banned, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, it bloody well should be. No, it's not. No, it's not banned. No, it's
No,
not
no,
banned.
yeah.
I'll tell another very, very quick funny story about grouse shooting. One time we were up on the moors, we discovered the hut where they went to at lunchtime. It was up on the top of a hill and it was full of beer. It had loads of beer. So we'd broken into it. So we started drinking the beer, and what we didn't drink, we kind of poured away. And they were down in the valley coming up to this hut, and they could see what we were doing. And they were all shouting and screaming and ranting and raving, but there's nothing they could do. They were watching us drinking their beer and destroying their beer. And of course, by the time they got there to no beer left, we'd gone. So they had a
Okay.
very pleasant day that day.
I thought that story was going to be worse, something to do with you refilling their containers with something else.
Oh
But never
no,
mind.
no, that's a pity. Well, it was cans, you see, so
No,
kind of
yeah,
couldn't really do that, you know.
couldn't do it now.
But yeah, that would have been good. Had we been able to do that, yeah.
Right. Well, as the two Ronnies say, we've got a packed program today, and so we wanted to start with this Monbiot article, Ronnie. So let me put that on the screen. See how we can do it. Probably need to. Might be better to put this
Yeah,
way.
George Monbiot has written an article in the Guardian. It's not the first time he's called for the reintroduction of wolves, and indeed he wants lynx to be reintroduced into the UK. And of course, at one time here we didn't just have wolves and lynx. We had lions, we had hyenas, and we had other really big predators that were wiped out a long time ago.
He says all that. He said that we
Yeah, it
often
says that in
think
the
of
article.
top predators, but lions, hyenas, bears,
Yeah, and
cats.
I think the last wolf was killed in the 17th century, so they think. Here, I mean, obviously, there are people listening to this who may have wolves in their country because they are native in they are still in the wild in some countries throughout the world. But the reason they were wiped out in the UK was because of animal farming, because they were obviously, some of them sometimes would prey on sheep and cows and animals like that, and so of course that's not going to be tolerated by the farmers, and so that's the reason they that's the reason they were wiped out over here.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one, because I think well, I've certainly recognized over the years that deers can be a problem from a vegan point of view, because they do quite a bit of damage.
Yes, I think
whether this is the solution.
Yeah, we see the thing with George Monbiot is he's a big believer in rewilding and allowing land to go back to nature, mainly to forest. He believes that would be really help in terms of combating the climate crisis, which of course it would. He's very much opposed to it. He's become very much opposed to animal farming. The main reason for that is because the amount of land it takes up through grazing animals, and he believes that we need to get rid of the animal farming and allow that land to go back, and it would mostly go back to forest. And of course, the reason it's not forest is because it's grazed. I mean, you look at the hills. I mean, I've got some friends who live in Wales, a beautiful place where they live, and they've got these hills all around them, and all the hills are just denuded. They're just grass, but there's one hill that's completely forested. It's just like a total forest on that hill. And the reason for that is because on all the other hills there's sheep farming, but on the one that's totally forested, it's an RSPB bird sanctuary, and there's no sheep there. So all the foresters, either the forest was never destroyed there, or it came back because there's no sheep grazing. And that really really emphasized to me how devastating sheep farming is to the environment, to the establishment of woodland. And I think he sees deer as similar to that. Deers, he sees that they stop in the numbers that they kind of exist, he sees that they kind of stop the re-establishment of forests because they'll eat all the young saplings. This is kind of what he believes, and this is why he thinks they need to be controlled. And of course, we've had an increasing population of deers because there's been lots of species introduced to the UK, and they've mainly been introduced by landowners, I think, either to provide venison, or else maybe just to just for display or something like that. There's
Well,
there's only a couple.
It's multifaceted though. This little bit here is really interesting. He's talking about trees in the uplands. He's talking about soft boundaries between habitats, which he calls ecotones. They're crucial for thriving food webs. Dead wood, which there's a dearth in this country now. That's an interesting thing. When I was a kid, you'd see dead wood in the sense of trees falling over in woods and just being left to rot, wouldn't it, really?
Yeah.
Scrub, and of course, farmers get kind of subsidies to grub out the scrub land and everything. Undrained wetlands and wild, healthy rivers. So there's quite a lot. I mean, he says in terms of the deers here, wolves too, but there's quite a lot of complicated. It's a bit of a complicated recipe thing here. Now,
yes.
Before you go on though, Ronnie, where would you situate Monbiot? Would you say he's like a plant-based environmentalist? He's not an animal liberationist.
He's not a vegan, because I mean he has described himself as a vegan, but I think that's because he's got a misunderstanding of what veganism is. He consumes a plant diet, and he's a very strong advocate of people eating a plant diet. He said it's the best thing anyone as an individual can do to protect the planet is to consume a plant diet. In other words, a diet suitable for vegans. But he's not he's not an advocate of animal rights. He's not an animal liberationist. It's done for he's doing this for kind of environmental reasons. I mean, concerned about loss of habitat and animals living in the wild, perishing and dying out, and that kind of thing, like a lot of environmentalists. But it's not really. It's not from an animal liberationist position.
Yeah. So I mean, it's important to say that.
Yes.
So we don't kind of say, well, he's not this. He doesn't really claim to be.
Well, he kind of he has said he's vegan, but that's like a lot of people.
It was an off and on thing about 3 times, wasn't it?
At one time he was kind of pretty much opposed to veganism, or certainly opposed to people adopting a plant diet at one time some years ago. But he's changed his view on that.
I think a few years ago I saw a Monbiot kind of why I'm no longer vegan, and then there was why I'm back to being vegan.
Because I think at one time he advocated more like this regenerative farming type stuff, but he's against that now. He's against he's really very much opposed to all animal farming, and it's for 2 reasons. It's first of all because of the amount of land it takes up, and secondly because of the pollution that it causes. And so he's kind of totally opposed to it, and he advocates in his latest book Regenesis, he advocates all sorts of other ways of producing food, but none of it includes animal farming.
Okay, we've had some hunters in the comments apparently. So hi Joanna, well done for holding those back. Okay, now see. One interesting thing about this Monbiot article for me is the fact that when you get the negative utilitarians, these are the people who want to micromanage the earth in order to obligate carnivores plant-based essentially, or this lab meat or something like that. And of course the answer to that is but we're not very good. We're not very good when it comes to managing ecosystems, for example. And ironically, Monbiot says that as a reason why we need the wolves. He's saying that we're not very good at controlling the deers, whereas the wolves would be.
Yes.
So he's almost like using the reverse of that argument. And
I think that I think it's a problem that's been created because we haven't had a vegan controlled society. You know, this is a problem. That's the reason why the wolves aren't here anymore, and the lynx and the other large predators, because they've been wiped out basically by farming or to please farming interests, animal farming interests. That's why.
Yeah.
And so we're you know, once again, like in a lot of cases, you know, we're faced with deciding upon a problem that isn't one we've created. That's been created by basically by
No,
species.
it kind of vegan cheeses me off this, with the fact that you often get people even coming up to a stall and go, "What are you going to do about this?" And you think, well, "Hang on a second, you know, you're the one who created this, and we're supposed to provide the solution." I mean, it happens over and over again, year after year, that they go, "There's this problem, you know, you vegans didn't create it, but what are you going to do about it?"
I know we're the ones that have got to solve it, and of course, this is there kind of is. I'd say there is a problem to some degree regarding overpopulation of deers. If we want to, you know, properly establish forest everywhere, but it's a question of like, which is the kind of, you know, as vegans, what would be, you know, how would we kind of deal with that? What would be our solution to that? And interestingly, though, there's a couple of a couple of like web pages from the Humane Society of the United States. I mean, first of all, I mean, George Monbiot, what he does in his article, he goes through the other methods of controlling the population of deers, and he points out the problems with all of them. He says that that fencing doesn't work, even electric fencing doesn't really work. Like shooting the deers doesn't really work either. And he kind of and also contraception doesn't work as well. So he kind of goes through the reasons, or his reasons, why all these other methods of controlling number of deers don't work, and then he comes to the conclusion that
so the HSUS is going against Monbiot here then.
The HSUS, in this article they're saying that there's been, they've been involved in several projects where contraception was successful in controlling the number of deers. So that's the first that they say that, and then there's another page on there. They've got this whole section that deals with deers really, and there's another another page that says that blaming deers for the the problem with preventing
biodiversity, isn't it?
Yeah, blaming them for problems in woodland is too simplistic, and there's lots of reasons why that can occur. And they're saying that I think they do say that the number of deers is kind of is too many, but it's not as big a problem as what's made out, and there are other reasons why.
So deers are a little bit scapegoated essentially then.
Yeah, scapegoated. Yeah. Okay. But you see, I think George Monbiot's got a general thing against grazing animals. I mean, you can understand it with the kind of the problems he has with animal farming and the grazing that takes place with those animals that stops woodland from growing. I can understand that, and obviously we do want to get rid of animal farming. But I think he categorizes deers as kind of similar, and for a long time he's been big into reintroducing animals that were former native species that have kind of been wiped out, like all sorts, not just the predators, but animals like beavers, for instance. And there has been a reintroduction of beavers in some areas of the UK. So that's kind of, and I think kind of he's written this argument kind of in kind of support of something he believed in anyway, if you see what I mean.
Okay. Well, I mean, those HSUS things are actually quite detailed. There's lots and lots of links to research.
Yes. Yes.
So
And I mean, even from an animal rights point of view, contraception isn't it's not ideal. I mean, really, we shouldn't be interfering with these animals at all. But I think we're in one of these, like we often are, and we are with like populations of dogs and cats, just to give one example, where we're in a kind of lesser of two evils kind of situation, because the ideal situation isn't really something we can implement, like leaving them alone.
yeah, we're into what Francione says, which is that real life, as it were, forces you to make some utilitarian calculations, even though you don't really want to.
Yeah.
You're kind of forced into it, really.
And then so first of all, we've got some doubts cast on what George Monbiot says by these articles from HSUS. That's the first thing. And then secondly, the kind of issue of introducing predatory species. How does that, from a vegan standpoint, what should our attitude be about that anyway? That's the thing. Like, kind of, because if those animals were there already, you just leave them alone. You just leave them. We're not going to go out and kill every predator because we want to stop them predating on other animals. We don't do that. Our attitude is to leave them alone. So what should our attitude be to the deliberate introduction of those species?
Now, what I'm doing is I'm putting the links to those HSUS things into the chat in case people want to look at that. I think we ought to probably address these questions that came in before we were on air, Ronnie, because they are interesting and pretty challenging, aren't they? So these are from AK, and first said, this one, reintroducing wolves is not compatible with veganism. So there's quite a statement. Where are the wolves sourced from?
I think probably how they'd be sourced would be through captive breeding programs.
Yeah, but where do you get?
Then obviously the ones that are involved in the captive breeding programs. But would they be using, for instance, there are wolves in zoos, aren't there? Unfortunately. Would those be used as like a breeding source, or would they not be suitable? So this this is a kind of valid point. Where would
it does smack of animal use, Ronnie, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it kind of is, because at some stage there would be, an unethical behaviour in the sourcing of these animals, wouldn't there? That they would, they'd either maybe come from zoos, or are they going to capture animals in the wild and bring them over? There'll be some sort of captive breeding involved, but as you say, what's the where does that come from?
Yeah, but I don't, it's not really an animal rights thing to say there will be some captive breeding involved. Yeah, but I mean, as soon as you say that, you're already saying
because the captive breeding itself is question. No. I mean, I agree with that. It's just that the comparison between, if you've got animals that are already in captivity for some reason, and then you breed them, that means that you're not actually taking them from the wild, but
or presumably don't stop them from breeding might be the best way of putting it.
Don't stop them from breeding. That's probably because they would naturally breed.
Okay, so all right, so say we came up with what we regarded as some kind of ethical way of obtaining them, right? Then you've got the second problem, which is this.
The last sentence there, though, by AK,
let me go back there. Okay.
About are they being used as a mere means to human ends? I don't think Monbiot. Well, it kind of depends, because they're
because they're going to be doing a job for us.
He sees it as that they're going to be doing the job of controlling the deers, but the reason why he wants the deers to be controlled is so that ecosystems better flourish. And of course,
I know that, but he did actually say that. He did say and let them get on with the job. So
it's a question of like, you see, because what would happen, if there were fewer deers, then that would be beneficial for, obviously beneficial for some animals, living in the wild, because though the habitat of those animals would thrive, wouldn't it, enabling them to thrive. So it's and this is a problem that's been created by humans. So where are problems like being
They
originally
always
created
are. They always are,
by
aren't
humans? Should
they?
we, should we just leave things alone, or should we kind of seek to interfere to
Well, Ronnie,
prevent?
here's one. You're more familiar with the article than I am.
Yes.
Did Monbiot address this question, which occurs to me, which is that when humans have interfered and made a species extinct, then the ecology then adapts to that, and kind of bits that would not normally thrive suddenly do, and all the rest of it. So by the time you're at the stage of reintroducing, you're not introducing them into what was there in the first place, are you?
Well, yeah, but I think what he fundamentally wants is a huge amount of regrowth of forest, and he sees the deers, what he regards as the overpopulation of deers as kind of preventing that. I think that's kind of his main, the main thrust of his argument regarding the wolves.
And so fencing doesn't work with deers very well, does it?
Well, that's what that's kind of what he says.
It's a dilemma, a real kind of vegan dilemma, this one. And
Yes.
and then you've got this second element to it, which is, okay, you've successfully created or had created or allowed to be created a population of wolves. You then let those individuals out into a free living situation, and then they're saying, well, that's just, we're guilty of murder by proxy.
But like, are we guilty of that with regard to cats? Are we guilty of that with regard to cats? I mean, cats massacre.
Well, it's true, isn't it? So the answer to that is
I mean, we don't let our cats out, for ethical reasons. Like, we've got they've got a run at the back of the house they can go out into. They've got lots of space in indoors and everything, and toys and stuff like that. And we don't do that for two reasons. First of all, because of the massive predatory effect. Because what you got to remember is cats are a domestic, apart from like the wild cat that is just in Scotland now. The cats that people have in their homes aren't native to this country. They come from, I think they originated in that kind of Egypt. They were first domesticated in Egypt about 4,000 years ago. They're from that part of the world, what you might call the Near East. They were brought here in various ways. So they're not a native, and so they were an introduced predator that is kind of that I suppose animals living in the wild in this country can't really cope with. And there's many hundreds of millions of birds and other animals living in the wild. Mammals, for instance, are killed by cats every year. So that's one of the reasons we don't let ours out. The other reason is for own safety. It's a very dangerous environment. This isn't their natural habitat. They're not from a habitat where there are people trying to poison cats. They're not from a habitat where there are cars driving at high speeds, through the territory that the cats would cross, for instance. There's so many hazards, such and for instance, if people have say rescued rats in their home, or they have rescued guinea pigs, or they don't have like rescued rabbits, they don't allow those animals to roam free, do they? Those animals are kept in a degree of confinement, and the reason is because it's regarded that it would be too great a risk to their lives for those animals to roam free. And I'd argue that it's the same, certainly these days, with cats. The risk to their own lives is too great, and when you kind of weigh those things up, it's actually, I'd feel that it's better to keep them as indoor animals. And it's controversial, and I've been involved in debates about this with other other people, other vegans, but that's my take on it. And this is kind of, this is similar, except the only difference is that those cats we have in our homes were never native to this country. whereas the wolf was at one time native to this country, and that's the only difference between those two things. So perhaps there's actually a stronger argument against letting cats out than there is for reintroducing wolves, because wolves originally were here.
Yeah, right, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, we did mention that wolf in your living room thing, and we found that there was a cat companion piece to it, which is called a cat on your tiles or something, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
They're both on YouTube. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So I think we've probably decided then that cats and deers, well, this reintroduction of wolves probably would be murder by proxy then.
Well,
makes it very difficult.
I mean, I would say that of all the options, the one that's closest to vegan principles, or the one that least infringes vegan principles, is the contraception. I'd say that's right, and kind of we know that the HSUS say that that's been successful in various projects, and I think the thing is that even if there were kind of some problems with it, if we had a vegan run society, we'd solve that, wouldn't it? A lot of these things, if we had a vegan run society, we would find the kind of the solution to every problem that kind of least went against vegan principles, wouldn't we?
We would, but we don't have a vegan run society. So what do you make of what Paul says? Because this is a strong point, I think. I mean, for example, you can imagine that a lot of people will be very fearful of the idea of having wolves.
What would happen is, I mean, the biggest opponents to the reintroduction of wolves are animal farmers, for the very reason that the wolves are killed in the first place, because they're concerned that they might predate on the farmed animals, and so they're going to face a huge and of course, wolves farmers will only be too keen to shoot wolves in the same way that they're very keen to shoot foxes.
About the general kind of population, because presumably when you think about the reintroduction of wolves, you're thinking about the kind of remote mountains of Wales, and in particular the Scottish remote areas and everything. But the kind of implication here is what when the numbers get so
the remote mountains of Wales. I mean, of course, there's loads of sheep farming on the hills in Wales, so that it probably wouldn't be too far for the wolf to travel to come across some sheep in the field, and they're very easy prey, aren't they? And I think this is the difficulty. Could this be done? Would this work in the present situation?
Does Monbiot address this about sheep farming versus deers?
Well, I mean, he's totally opposed to sheep farming. He wants sheep farming abolished. So presumably,
so that would be a prerequisite.
That would have to go first. It would have to go first, wouldn't it? The sheep farming would have to go first, and then on the hills where the sheep formerly grazed, the woodland would come back. And then what his worry would be that the deers would come and stop that woodland regenerating. Probably that would be kind of how we would think about it, I would imagine.
And Andy's in the chat having fun here. The old lady that swallowed the fly.
I know, it's So I'd say that it's a very difficult problem, but like the kind of the least unethical solution is the contraception, and the kind of right. There's various contraceptives that can be used, and some are better than others. Some can be really quite environmentally harmful, because of course when the animals go to the toilet, they excrete the contraceptive, and that can then have an effect and stuff like that. But there is one particular one which the HSUS talk about that they say is a very natural substance and doesn't cause that problem.
Okay. The wolf recently settled in the Netherlands. The Party for the Animals political party is protecting the wolf, as many narrow-minded people and or farmers rather see them killed. Yes.
Yeah, because of course, if wolves were reintroduced, then kind of our position changes, because as soon as they're
Well, that's not the suggestion there. It just said recently settled, as though they
may have
Right.
they may have migrated from somewhere else, because of course they're in other parts of Europe, and so they haven't got across any expanse of water. So they may have kind of just. I don't know what the situation was in the Netherlands, where they. But I don't know whether Joanna knows more about it, whether they were reintroduced or whether they naturally, you know, they naturally.
It's kind of obviously this entire scenario involves a lot of other things as well. It's not just a question of, well, let's just bung some wolves in there. I mean, even if we got over our kind of ethical objections to that, a lot of other things have got to happen as well. Anyway, just to make this thing kind of workable.
Yes, of course, yeah. And kind of what's our, you know, for me, it's for me, you know, the fundamental solution to this, like kind of everything, is to promote veganism, isn't it? Because we're only going to have proper solutions to these problems once we have a kind of vegan-run society. And so that has got to be the primary aim of everything we do, is to try to bring that about.
Yeah, well, I agree with that to the extent of, if you've got a vegan society, then the problems that do arise, wherever they be, will be dealt with a lot differently than a non-vegan society, and so therefore it's automatically a better idea.
We're putting forward our views on what's the best way of kind of dealing with that problem, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be dealt with in the way that we would like to see it dealt with, because we're not the ones in control.
No, that is true. Do you want to move on to your deforestation point?
Yeah, because this is linked. You see, we're trying to link up all the articles. This is a kind of positive article, really. Yes, and it's about, once again, to do with forests, to the Amazon more specifically, and it says that the deforestation of the Amazon has fallen by over 60% compared to last July. A really, really big reason for this is the defeat of Bolsonaro in the Brazilian elections last year. He was like all for destroying the Amazon and like making money out of it, and like it was like appalling. And he was defeated by a guy called Lula, who's promised to protect the Amazon as much as he can. And I think a lot of the reason for this is because of the change of government in Brazil, where they put in various protection measures for the Amazon. And in actual fact, the figures could be better than this, because the period they've used to assess this figure of 60% fall includes some of the time that Bolsonaro was still in power. So when it comes to a period when none of it's under the rule of Bolsonaro, then those figures might get even better than that.
Yeah. Did you chase this link here, the Deter Satellite Alert System? Do you know what that is?
No, I didn't actually.
No. Sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but that to create alerts for people that are seen destroying the forest. But you see, so this is great news, and it's funny that kind of we did a show, didn't we? It was part of another show where I talked about my the three best things I thought had happened in for animal liberation in last year, and the second best one was that Bolsonaro was kicked out, and already we're seeing positive results from that. So yes, hope it carries on like that. But you see, once again, we're back to the what is the most important thing any of us can do to protect the rainforest, because we have to remember that a massive amount of this destruction of the rainforest is caused by animal agriculture. It's either caused by land being cleared for animals to directly graze on, or that land being cleared for crops to be grown to feed to farmed animals. That's a huge contributor to the destruction of rainforest. And in fact, we hear a lot about palm oil, the destructive effect of palm oil, and that's true. A lot of rainforest is destroyed to produce palm oil, but animal agriculture is far more serious than palm oil as a destroyer of rainforest.
Well, there's your answer to that thing about the wolves, at least in Netherlands. They walk from Germany.
You see, I think if there was a land bridge, and of course at one time there was a land bridge, wasn't it? Like everything was connected. We didn't have the channel. Everything was connected, and of course, so animals were able to migrate of their own will. And I think if that was the situation, if wolves were able to walk from Europe to the UK, that would be fine. I wouldn't have any problem with that. The problem is that, humans interfering and humans creating the reintroduction. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a common theme, especially for us, in the sense that, most problems are created by something that humans have done.
Yes, but the good news really is if wolves had migrated from Germany to Holland, then there must have been favourable conditions in Holland for them to want to go there. There must have been something that kept them out of Holland previously. So perhaps, there's been a bit of a change in attitudes there that's enabled the wolves to kind of feel safe that they can kind of actually go there.
Well, I don't suppose they got an invite, so they wouldn't know.
No, didn't get an invite, but there must have been something. Why were they? I would imagine that at one time they kind of would have been in Holland, and then they were kind of wiped out from Holland, or the Netherlands is the proper name, isn't it? And then they've kind of reintroduced themselves, haven't they? They're all the same. I mean, the thing is that animals don't know. This is where other animals are much more sensible than humans. They don't recognise international boundaries, do they? They don't have to stop at a customs post.
Well, there shouldn't be such a thing, should they?
Yeah, well, and there shouldn't be such a thing for us either. The whole idea of nation states is like just completely irrational and ridiculous. And nation states are actually forged by violence, by someone using violence to claim a particular piece of land for themselves. And so we need to look to a world where nation states are abolished, and we can have free movement of humans in the same way that there's free movement.
So Ronnie, what's your answer to people who say, what's this got to do with veganism?
Well, it's got everything to do with veganism, because what is the very best way we can combat the deforestation of the Amazon, and indeed the destruction of all forests? Because, as I've said before, we've actually got rainforest in the UK. It's on the west coast. I think maybe Wales and the northwest. We've got temperate rainforest here, a small amount of it. Obviously, in Brazil, it's tropical rainforest, and the reason our rainforest here is so small, the main reason for it is animal agriculture, and the main reason for the destruction of the rainforest in Brazil is animal agriculture. So the most important thing that anyone can do in their own life to combat the destruction of any rainforest is to go vegan, and better still, to encourage as many other people to go vegan as well, because that's the we're back to this fundamental thing. It's veganism that will ultimately solve this problem.
Well, the animals only vegans are not going to like it, Ronnie.
Well, but it is for the benefit of other animals, because who lives in those forests? It's other animals, isn't it? It's their territory that's being destroyed through human activity, and so reforestation, allowing forests to grow back, stopping the causes of deforestation are primarily in the interests of other animals, and it's this is all to do with animal liberation, so they should be pleased with this as well.
Yeah, but they're not. But so this one.
Well,
this one...
I mean, the problem is if people think that, and once again we're on to this other article, people think that veganism is either a diet, or that it's very, very narrowly confined just to do with animal use and exploitation, and not connected to other forms of oppression, then they may take the view that kind of it doesn't really matter what happens to the rainforest. But that isn't accordance with, that isn't in tune with veganism anyway. It's not at all in accordance with vegan principles to have those views. And this is this kind of is another article by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, I think. And it's reaffirming how beneficial the vegan diet is for the environment, and it gives various figures about how much better the vegan diet is in terms of various forms of environmental protection. It's only a really, really short article, but it kind of gives the percentages on to do with different forms of different forms of impact on the environment, and how much reduced the that impact is if somebody adopts a plant diet or a diet suitable for vegans.
Yeah, again, it's interesting that we've got this. I suppose I think did we say last week it'd be better if we didn't use this phrase, a vegan
Well,
diet?
it's very difficult because you see there's a kind of lot of confusion because veganism is fundamentally a philosophy. Obviously, adopting a vegan diet is part of very important part of living according to that philosophy. But veganism isn't a diet; it's a philosophy, and a vegan is someone that lives according to the vegan philosophy. A vegan isn't, just because someone eats a plant diet.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. In terms of claims making, if we get all the vegans together and say, would it be better not to use that phrase ever?
Well,
vegan diet.
I mean, a vegan-friendly diet. Probably, if you're looking at kind of how can we still make this a short way of explaining it? Because if you say, I say a diet suitable for vegans, but that's quite a mouthful. A plant diet, I'm not sure.
Well, you got that a vegan's diet, but the point is, it's quite interesting that if you've got people saying a vegan diet, and then in the next breath, veganism is not a diet.
I know. It's problematic. I think vegan-friendly diet perhaps is the best way, the shortest way that we can just add one more word to it, and maybe that would be okay.
I see. Andy is skeptical today. Even if we agree with you, they'd walk away and continue to use it.
Well, I think, I think this is a problem with lots of things. I have discussions with people. Like I believe that kind of, vegan education is fundamental to, achieving animal liberation. And I say this all the time and explain the reasons. And people listen to me and they'll kind of agree with me, going, yeah. And then they carry on doing the same thing that they've always done.
This is what Andy is saying, exactly the same there in the thing, because
I know, it's like really weird. It's not like they're kind of locked into a particular way of doing things, and like even though because the argument about the fundamental importance of veganism and vegan outreach, in order to create fundamental revolutionary positive change in society, it's cast iron. To me, there isn't. There can't be really a counter argument to that. It's kind of so obvious, and so people, I'll talk to people about it. They kind of won't really argue. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then I'm sort of think, so you're going to go out and do some vegan outreach, are you? But they don't. You know what I mean? It's kind of really odd how people can have that kind of split way of behaving.
Yeah, I think there's a more kind of nuanced one when it comes to the language, the advocacy language, because of course, the tragedy of modern vegan advocacy is the way that the word cruelty has become the dominant word, and there's nothing wrong with the word cruelty, and if it's just one in the mix, it's not too bad. But when it becomes the dominant word, and all you've got to do is go onto any social media platform to see that it is, then it's a problem. Because essentially, and Andy's put out a couple of films and some memes about this. Essentially, our modern day vegan language is essentially the same as the RSPCA now.
Yes. It's right to use cruelty as like in the kind of subtext, but you can't. The fundamental problem isn't cruelty. The fundamental problem is exploitation, stroke use, and oppression. Those are the problems, and cruelty can be part of that. But even if it's not part of that, then all that's nevertheless still wrong.
Yeah, well, we've said it, haven't we? But even with the weak current official definition of veganism from the Vegan Society, that's relatively weak compared with earlier statements and such. But at least they put exploitation of in front of cruelty.
Yes. You see, I'm wondering whether they're using the word cruelty where I would use the word oppression. In other words, they recognise that there are other ways in which humans harm other animals, other ways in which humans behave, negative to other animals that don't come under the category of exploitation. So perhaps they've used cruelty to try and cover that. But it's not the best word. I'd use oppression.
That is an interesting suggestion. again, I think Andy believes, because I mean, Andy now is probably the foremost expert on the vegans. The actual magazine, the journal, are going through them systematically, downloaded them all, and all that. Certainly knows more about them than I do now, to the extent of you mentioned an article. Oh, well, that's in,
Yeah. Oh, it's excellent. It's really excellent to have how Andy's bringing all these things to life is absolutely brilliant, because of course they,
but going back to the point, I think he thinks that they use cruelty a bit different from what we use it. They weren't really using it in the RSPCA way.
No, I think that's right. It could be used instead of oppression, but I think oppression is a better word, and oppression actually covers more than cruelty, really, because cruelty kind of, like, you almost get this idea of an animal, screaming in pain type of thing. That's cruelty, whereas oppression doesn't necessarily need to involve
we
that.
we know what the culture means about these words, because there are footage of street activists who talk about cruelty, then talk about abuse, and as soon as they do, people start talking about kicking cats and dogs,
yes,
and stuff,
absolutely.
and that's the cultural norm. And that's why everybody is against cruelty and everybody is against animal abuse, because it's associated culturally with those things. So then you've got the choice as an advocate: do we carry on using their language and their concepts, or do we reintroduce something different and say, okay, well, that's the way you look at it. What about this? What about animal use rights violation? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that, otherwise, what tends to happen with these films then is that people get into an argument about what abuse means and who it covers, and then you've got confusion between the two, to the extent that you then get the activist accusing the person that they've been agreeing with, of being an abuser, and then the person on the street walks off in a huff, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's because they haven't been able to resolve this cultural understanding, because the vegans think of words like cruelty differently. They think if you're against cruelty, it means you're a vegan.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks that.
No. I think we've got to use words that mean the same to both, to both parties to the discussion, don't we? Really, which I think oppression and exploitation and use kind of would mean the same, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you wanted to go there to establish some rapport, you need to move away from that, rather than then have a big blazing argument about, oh, well, you've got this word wrong and we vegans know what it really means and all that. Because culturally, we're in the minority. We don't know what it means. They know what it means, because it's a thing that they've been taught since day one,
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, enough of that. So now this is the do you want to say anything more about this one?
No, I think it's just that this, this is another article. I mean, there's been a lot of articles like this, like reaffirming that about how the vegan friendly diet is the best diet for the environment, but it's kind of also the best diet for other animals kind of living in the environment, in the natural world. Because I will say that animal farming, and indeed the fishing industry as well, they actually kill animals twice, because they kill the animals that are directly exploited, oppressed, and killed by those industries, but they also kill other animals that are harmed through how those industries operate. In other words, through how the pollution that comes from animal agriculture, the effect on it driving the climate crisis, or preventing us from dealing with the animal climate crisis, and all the other animals that have perished because of that. It's the same with with industrialized fishing. That doesn't just harm the fish that are directly caught. It harms a lot of other animals living in the sea, harms vegetation in the sea, which once again that has a that prevents us from properly combating the climate crisis as well, because that vegetation absorbs carbon dioxide. So these things actually kill animals twice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this really, I mean, as far as I can see, this is just because it's like everything with research, people will point out, oh, well, what about the one that said the opposite? Well, there's always going to be that. It's a question of looking for the pattern in
Yes.
research. That's how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, like there's some, you get the odd article saying that the climate crisis doesn't exist or it's not made by humans. You get the odd one, but like overwhelming scientific opinion is that we do have a climate crisis and it's been created by human activity, and it's very similar to anything like this as well.
Yeah, well, we've got quite a bit of pushback in the vegan community now as well to this idea that that in actual fact, I think I saw a meme yesterday saying, "Oh, it's very hot climate crisis," and somebody responded, "No, it's summer."
What you see, I think the thing is, you see, what I would say to people is, look, what we need to do is use the sort of "what if I'm wrong" hypothesis. You see, so I mean, for instance, like I believe we do have a serious climate crisis, and it's been caused by human activity, right? And that we need to take measures to deal with that. Now, you say, I'm talking with someone who doesn't believe that, right? Now, okay, so what if I'm wrong and they're right? What harm is done? What harm is done by, sort of ending animal farming to help combat the climate crisis, ending the fishing industry? Those are like positive things, aren't they? Like even ending the burning of fossil fuels, and having other forms of like solar panels and wind farms and stuff like that, other means of generating electricity. Surely those things that are also a benefit, because there's a massive reduction of pollution if you do it that way, right? So even if all this about the climate crisis wasn't true, the measures that we would take to combat the climate crisis are beneficial in other ways. So if I'm wrong, there's not a lot of harm done. But if they're wrong,
Well,
right, and the climate crisis.
hang on a minute though, Ronnie. They'd say, well, what about the destruction of all these industries along the way? That's what they'd say.
But then those people, those industries are going to be replaced by other industries, aren't they? In other words, if you're, someone that's, the industries that are producing fossil fuels, we're going to need to have industries, that producing renewables, aren't we? So and that's very minor compared with, like, kind of huge issues of kind of pollution and the problems caused by animal farming and stuff like that.
Do you know what Ben's demo was, Ronnie? Been to a demo in Downing Street. Do you know what that is about?
I know, I don't know. Is that to do with, because it's Ben Beagle? Is that to do with beagles? Is that to do with experiments on animals? I don't know. Perhaps Ben could put another comment to explain that. But you see, but say if that person's wrong, say if they're wrong, and the climate crisis is real, and the climate crisis has been created by humans, say if they're wrong, and they carry on their trajectory of like believing that's wrong, then we're faced with disaster, aren't we? We're faced with disaster. So if you use the "what if I'm wrong" principle, it's far better to believe that
the precautionary principle, as it said there.
Yeah, precautionary principle. Yeah. If you use that, it's far better to, to accept the majority scientific opinion that the climate crisis is real and that it's created by. But I think a lot of the problem is we've had a big move towards conspiracy. You see, what happens with conspiracy theories is that one leads to another. One conspiracy theory leads to another, and someone disappears down the wormhole, and they end up believing that there's loads of people are lizards and shit. They're kind of, one conspiracy theory leads to another. And I think kind of what's happened with the vegan community, I think a lot of this was started with COVID. I've noticed that COVID has caught. I mean, there are people vegans that believed in conspiracy theories before that, but I think COVID's been a big thing because, and a lot to do with the vaccine, because the vaccine was tested on animals and stuff like that. That people have difficulty dividing things up. Okay, so it's immoral that the vaccine has been tested on animals, but that's a different issue as to whether the vaccine works or not. They're two separate issues and need to be dealt with separately. People lump them together and think that somehow the vaccines were a way of like kind of, injecting people with some kind of chip that would control them all and shit like that, because they don't like the vaccines because they were tested on animals. Then all these other things come in, people aren't able to separate these things out. And I think that's where a lot of it came from. And then that's led to people adopting other conspiracy theories. But the biggest conspiracy is
it was a Camp Beagle thing.
Camp Beagle thing, yes.
I wrote it down what you said. You said that people think they're lizards and shit. I would have thought that people are just shit lizards.
Well, who needs lizards? We've got humans. Who needs? Do you know what I mean? Who needs people to be lizards? Isn't it bad enough having humans? For heaven's sake, But there we go, and I think that's kind of happened. And the biggest conspiracy is the conspiracy, to brainwash people into carrying on consuming animal products and oppressing animals on the way. That's the biggest conspiracy. That's the one that we all have to be doing our best to deal with, isn't it?
It is. Now we're on the hour. We've got two more things.
Yes, and we've got some. Have a look at my list of the things. You've got the list there anyway, Roger, haven't you?
Well, I've got them up on my screen. Yeah,
you've got them on your screen. Yeah. Now you see that's there's another article relating to diets. But the kind of the headline isn't too accurate on this, because it kind of the woman who wrote it is really a better title would be that really, to sum up what she said, it should be fair weather vegans should remember it's a philosophy, not a fad. That would probably be a more accurate way of kind of describing.
Yeah, I think this person does a few vegan related ones, but she herself is a vegetarian.
She's a vegetarian herself, but she says that she's stuck. What she's talking about is fair weather vegans. People claim to be vegan, and they're just doing it for like dietary reasons, and then the slightest thing can stop them from doing it because they're not doing it for philosophical reasons. And she says that she's been a vegetarian for years and years for philosophical reasons, which is like really strange, because like, how can you really be a vegetarian for philosophical reasons when you're kind of, just eating dairy products and eggs instead of, the meat and the fish, and you're doing just as much harm. So I can't really see how someone can really be a vegetarian for philosophical reasons, but she sort of kind of claims that she is, doesn't she? I mean, I was a vegetarian for philosophical reasons because I didn't know, about what happened to the cows and calves and hens and chicks, but as soon as I found that out, I went vegan. No.
So she's using this stuff that, I mean, there's been quite a lot of publicity about the Beyond Meat, their shares slumping. Now, it's interesting this because I heard somebody who kind of is on top of all these kind of figures and everything. If you look at it in terms of the overall market for vegan meats, or plant-based alternatives, whatever you want to call them, then they're not doing bad. And it looks like one major problem for Beyond Meat is the fact that it's a very expensive version.
Yeah, I think the simple solution to this is that we've got people don't have as much money to spend, so they're not going to spend that money on expensive food items. And if someone's not an ethical vegan and they're just some sort of flexitarian, then then a lot of times they are going to replace the vegan friendly stuff with stuff containing animal products, because there's nothing philosophical about their philosophy doesn't come into their choices, does it? But someone who's a genuine vegan isn't going to, they're still going to carry on, eating vegan friendly food, aren't they? They're not going to.
Yeah, another thing, Ronnie, is because some of the stuff that is said there in that top one, there's been a drop off and all that kind of stuff. Vegan restaurants are closing. Now that's certainly been the case in Dublin. We had a lot of those, but I think that's to do with the pandemic.
I think it's also to do. See, one of our local vegan restaurants closed down, but in the same street, in the same high street, loads of small businesses have closed down There's loads of empty shops because they can't, because they're not getting the custom. So it's across the board problem for small businesses, and of course, vegan restaurants, vegan cafes are small businesses, so they're going to suffer the same as everyone else. And I think that's a lot to do with it. That's a lot to do with it. Yeah, the pandemic has had the result as not so many people eat out. It has affected people going out and people mixing socially. That's still because people got in the habit of, because once again we're back to like humans being creatures of habit, and people got out of one habit and got into another habit because of the pandemic, a habit of not socializing as much. And of course, they've stayed with that habit. They've not gone back to their old way. And that has affected, people eating out, I think, across the board.
Well, I tell you what, two activists came up last Sunday, Ronnie, and they said, this is our first day out together since the end of the, and so,
Yeah.
So people's kind of behaviour has certainly kind of been
It's changed
affected.
people's behaviour. People are probably getting more deliveries. They're eating more at home rather than going out. And if places don't do deliveries, like that vegan cafe that closed down, they didn't do deliveries, so they didn't get any income through that. So they'd be out competed by places that do deliveries.
Yeah. There's another. That point you made about everybody suffering was a farmer came up and started talking to Declan, and he was very aggressive at first, and then he calmed down, ended up shaking hands and all that and everything with Jack, because of course with Declan being an ex-farmer himself, it kind of calms them down pretty well.
Oh yes.
They can't do the old, oh, you've never been on a farm in your life and you don't know anything about it type routine. And so he kind of calmed down, but he was kind of saying, well, we're really struggling at the moment. And Declan was going, well, look up the street. Who's not struggling at the moment?
Yeah. I think everyone is, and I think it's general. And of course, a lot of people are ordering stuff online, and they started ordering stuff online during the pandemic, and they've carried on. I mean, we get deliveries from, we get like a food delivery, a supermarket delivery every week. For instance, which we didn't do before the pandemic, but we've just carried on with it because it's so much easier.
Vegan Meals on Wheels.
And that's, well, I think it's kind of, people are getting a lot of deliveries now instead of eating out. And so if a place doesn't offer deliveries, they're gonna suffer, aren't they? Because they're not going to have that income stream.
Yeah, that's right. And then obviously the ones that are geared up for that because of their size or because of their tradition, that they're obviously going to be.
They're going to do.
This is an interesting one. Going back to the vegetarians, I think here, could you be philosophically against the actual act of eating other animals as opposed to the killing of them?
I don't know whether that would be an actual philosophy. I think it might be a more aesthetic type thing.
Well, this is getting close to Peter Singer's position, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he's okay. He's okay about them being killed if you do it.
Yeah, yes, I suppose in that sense, if you're thinking, if it's only to do with if it's only to do with suffering, your philosophy only covers suffering, that you
So is this? I think Elliot might be getting the idea of the kind of yuck factor, maybe.
Well, yeah, but that wouldn't be to do with philosophy. It'd be to do more with the aesthetics. Like you get people saying, "Well, I'm not going to eat those chips if they're cooked in the same fat that the fish was cooked in," right? But that's only an aesthetic objection because cooking the chips in the same fat as the fish doesn't contribute in any way to the oppression of other animals. So it's just that people don't like the idea that those things are cooked together. So it's an aesthetic objection, really, rather than a kind of actual philosophical one. In a sense, they might think of it as a philosophical one, but it's kind of actually not.
Yeah, well, I don't like the idea.
I mean, I don't, the idea of it, yeah, but why does the idea not appeal to us? It isn't really to do with that it contributes to anything happening to animals, because it kind of doesn't. It's just that we kind of just don't like the idea of it. We don't want to think,
I wanted to point out something. You pointed out the headline, right? Now, what are you going to do here is you're going to have, because Andy wrote in and I think got a letter published. Must be probably in the I don't know, the hard version or something. But
Yeah.
so there's a problem. There's a problem with the title, and that was probably done by a sub-editor and not
Yes.
this Barbara Ellen, because you don't really. I mean, when I did an article for the Irish Times, they did the headline and the subheading.
It was frustrating. I mean, I often write letters to the local newspaper, and we have, you know, different people from the group, and we actually had a letter published on the subject of that they've actually that it got us another letter, because the letter was about the fact that they put a title to a previous letter that didn't reflect what was in the letter.
Yeah,
and they do that all the time.
Well, it's because if you've got a sub-editor who's a bit kind of ideologically driven, you've got a problem. Which brings me to this point here. Look at what they decided to use as you know, to highlight. I've eaten nice fake meat, and I've gnawed on nightmare substances with all the flavor of a boiled wash in a tube, right? But so, I mean, that doesn't exactly fill you with.
It's just about food, isn't it? It's not about any kind of philosophy there.
No. But when you actually look at where she puts that, if I can find it, she actually kind of says something else. She kind of changes that quite a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, here it is now, kind of thing. But you know, because she said, "Good or bad, I'll take it anyway, any day over what happens to the industrial meat industry." So if you take that last bit and add it to that, it does change the flavor of what she was getting at, and that is the power of sub-editing. Bit of media sociology for you folks.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, but I see, once again, with all this, you know, all this kind of idea. I mean, you know, you've not got. It isn't vegans that are stopping eating the vegan friendly food. Vegans aren't going to stop eating vegan friendly food. They might change what they eat. They might say, well, I can't afford that particular type of food, so I'll buy a cheaper food, you know, that's suitable for vegans. But they're just going to swap the Beyond Burger, aren't they, for lentils or something, aren't they? Or a cheaper kind of own brand burger, aren't they? You know, from the supermarket, which you can get. That's what's going to happen. They're not going to suddenly go back to eating animal products. It's only the kind of flexitarian type or curious people that are going to do that, isn't it?
And you were right that Elliot didn't mean the yuck factor. That I was wrong on that. You were right that I was wrong. So yeah, okay. So on that one. Now, do we want to move to the last one? Or are we going to leave that one for next time? Or?
Well, I think we can very quickly mention the last one, because it kind of is, it is interesting. And yeah, I guess I can kind of understand. Well, we have respect for the dead bodies of humans that we don't have for the dead bodies of other animals, don't we? And where does that come from? You know.
Wait, you're saying kind of latent speciesism or something? Are you saying?
Well, it kind of is in a way, because look, you know, because I remember, or we actually have a respect for the dead bodies of humans that we don't have for the living bodies of other animals. I remember that I was on a radio program. Was interviewed on a radio program. Remember the New Church Guinea Pig campaign, where they dug up the body of a relative of the owners of the guinea pig farm.
How could one forget, Ronnie?
Gladys Hammond, her name was, and it was. This was, for people who don't know, it was this farm that was breeding guinea pigs for supply to laboratories, and there was a campaign against it. And during the course of the campaign, the body of this relative of the people that ran the farm got dug up, and the bones scattered or something. Her name was Gladys, and of course there's furore over this, you know. And I was interviewed on the thing, and I said, it's very strange, isn't it, that people care about the dead body of a human more than they care about the living bodies of guinea pigs. Don't you think that's you know, that's an indictment of our society? Which of course it was, you know, and I said that on the radio program. Everyone's so concerned about these bones that don't feel anything, but they're not concerned about the guinea pigs that are being sent off to be tortured, you know. But people are concerned about the bones of their dead relatives, aren't they, for, you know, for some reason. So of course, if they're concerned about the you know, bones of humans, but not concerned about the bones of animals, other animals, then surely that is a form of speciesism as well.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there are deep sociological and psychological explanations for that kind of stuff as well. So, especially
Yeah, I mean, it
terms,
kind of, really logically, it kind of, in a sense, doesn't make sense because, like, once you're dead, and that's the kind of end of it, isn't it? I mean, I'd rather be just
yeah, but
left out.
it's to do with things like, I mean, there's been quite a lot of sociology about the kind of rituals, especially kind of thing like funerals. They play a social role, not least in kind of like marking respect for the dead, but also allowing everyone else to move on. Once the funeral's done, you get back to your life, and the Marxists would then say, well, that's great for capitalism because it means that you can get your grieving done and then get back to work, right, and not this kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
but of course, if a body is dug up, then there's no closure. Then the closure that was supposed to be by the internment has gone. So there's all kind of arguments.
Yeah, they'd have to. Well, I think they buried her again with some sort of ceremony, probably to, for closure for the.
Yeah, well, presumably you're not saying so. We've helped you out. No, okay. So,
well, we helped, but they probably helped out the funeral
Yeah.
directors. They had another go.
Yeah,
They had like another go, didn't they?
Yeah, let's not go
Perhaps
there.
it was funeral directors. Perhaps it's funeral directors dug her up. not animal rights people.
Now Andy's going to like this because we're into Eva Batt and Kathleen Janaway territory here.
Now this is interesting. That you see, the thing is, and once again, you talk about George Monbiot. He covers in his book Regenesis. He talks a lot about the soil and how the soil is this wonderful living organism with multitude of creatures living in the soil, and how important it is, and how we've kind of destroyed the soil, and that has such a devastating impact on life on Earth. And this is kind of this research that's kind of come to the conclusion that even more species of not just animals but other sorts of living things live in the soil than was previously thought. And that once again,
looks
see, a lot of
very sci-fi, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people think soil is just dirt. There's nothing in soil. It's just dirt. It's like this sterile dirt, and that's really been an attitude that's kind of been behind farming, where what's been happening is just these kind of artificial fertilizers have been pumped into the soil, and it's been like almost treated like a sterile environment that kind of needs these things.
Well, here's a vegan question for you, Ronnie, because if you've got the attitude that you've got your veganic allotment, you bring some vegetables in and then you wash them, does that mean that you're drowning all these other animals? And if you don't wash them very carefully because you're not bothered, which we were like that when we were back in Liverpool, then that means you're eating them then, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, or there is a kind of, I suppose it kind of depends on. I mean, what you're really concerned mainly about is the ones that are sentient, isn't it? And like a lot of these species, they're not sentient species. I mean, they're very, very important, for the soil, and they're important for the other animals that live in the soil, because obviously, the ones that are probably the kind of sentient ones will be sort of top of the food chain, so they'll be kind of living on the other ones, and so those other ones are important as well in that sense. And I suppose kind of what we would do is ones like like your slugs and your snails and that, carefully remove those and put them somewhere safe, and anything you can see. But when you're talking about stuff like bacteria and all that, then obviously you kind of, I don't see a problem with kind of washing that off.
Andy said he's been saying something for 80 years. I didn't know he was that old. Did you?
No, I thought he was about 77, Andy. 78.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah,
he was 80.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still not as old as me, though. Still not as old as me.
I don't know what Sophie, as my dad always says, stick him in the wheelie bin. Well, that got that woman into trouble, didn't it? That the woman who was
the one that put the cat in the wheelie bin. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I know. No, that was like big uproar over that from people.
Yeah.
That, meanwhile,
as you can see, I opened up so many Guardian articles for today's show that it stops me. It goes, you need to register to keep reading.
Oh, you actually don't. In fact, what you do, if you scroll up a bit.
Oh yeah, okay.
And scroll up a bit.
Or if I
No,
If I refresh,
scroll
would
up
that work?
scroll the other way.
Well, that's down. You said up.
And is there any more? Does it go any further? Just if you click on "I'll do it later," then you're able to read it.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
and it lets you do that all the time. So it's not that kind of. I mean, I get the
And
I read the Guardian.
have you ever, Ronnie? Have you ever done it later? That's the question.
Yes, I mean,
yeah.
I read the Guardian app. I have a quick look at the Guardian app. There's actually very few articles that I actually read. I mean, obviously these I kind of did,
Yeah.
but there's very few that I actually read. But
Well, here's a vegan question for you, Ronnie. Have you really looked into whether they're sentient? Because
well, no, well, I think the thing is, no, I think this is the thing that obviously, you know, animals like slugs and snails. Yeah, I think you know there's some evidence they are, and I'd give them the benefit of the doubt. It's kind of, you know, maybe the same with insects as well. There's been some evidence recently that bees are sentient, and so that might well apply to other insects. But when you
how do they get this evidence, Ronnie?
Sorry, how did they
get
get it?
Yeah.
I kind of really don't know, and you do worry sometimes about how they have tamed it in some of these cases.
I mean, is this cognitive ethology where they're just observing, or are they
Yeah,
experimental?
well, yeah, you'd hope that it was that rather than any form of interference. But like when you come in, when you're sort of looking at plants, they see a lot of these. There's only a very tiny amount of these animals that are mammals. A lot of them are plants. They're fungi. They're bacteria. You know, are plants, fungi, and bacteria sentient?
Yeah, but you're not saying only mammals are sentient, though, are you? So
no, no, I'm not saying only mammals are sentient, but a lot of these species they're talking about actually aren't animal species. They're species of they're plants, they're fungi, they're bacteria. It's this whole web of life. But obviously, the plants, fungi, and the bacteria are going to sustain. They'll probably contribute to sustaining the animals. And I mean, there are some. You know, I don't think it's necessarily the case that all animals are sentient. I mean, there are some. You know, the word animal. It's like a biological term, really. And there are some, you know, some creatures, some beings that are technically
I agree with that.
classed as
I've
animals
always
that are very,
argued
very
that
simple organisms.
the term animal rights is rather misnamed if you want to be
Yes,
technical about
it is, because you've got some very simple forms of animal that it's very hard to see how they could be sentient because they lack any of the structures that we associate with sentience. You see, like some they're technically animals, but they're very, very simple in their formation.
Well, there's two things to say about that, Ronnie. First of all, we always do the thing about giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes,
the kind of Tom Reagan thing. At the same time, it does say something about the crop deaths argument. You know, where you get all these smarty pants who want to kind of beat vegans over the head with the crop deaths argument, and they might be relying on the plight of non-sentient beings largely, not always, but largely. And so
yes,
we've got the argument about, you know, if the numbers argument about, you know, who is using most anyway, is it,
well,
you know,
you see, you know, I'd say, well, you're, you know, somebody like I say, well, you're really concerned. You say you're really concerned about crop deaths, are you? Really concerned about crop deaths? You brought it up. And you know that as a non-vegan, you're actually responsible for far more crop deaths than vegans are, because the amount of crops that are fed through animals before they're killed for humans to eat. You know, far more crops are grown to sustain non-vegans. I mean, we just talked about the Amazon. We just talked about the amount of that land that is cleared to provide food for farmed animals, for instance. So, you know, it's non-vegans that are responsible for far more crop deaths than vegans, for a start.
Elliot is saying, I'm fairly sure there's lots of evidence for ants and many other insects.
Well, I think yes. I mean, I think that they're kind of I don't dispute that, and I think that we kind of have to be, you know, this idea, you know, tread lightly upon the earth. You know that. You know that. I mean, I very much kind of believe in that in terms of like, sort of metaphorically, but also practically and physically. That
it is interesting, though, isn't it, that the only writer that really went for, as it were, insect rights was Joan Denea. Everyone else steered clear.
Well, I think and I think it's because insects are really, really small. It's much more difficult to avoid harming them than it is with larger larger animals. But I still think we kind of need to, we do need to take care. I mean, when I'm out and about in the, in the garden in the morning, I'm kind of looking down, making sure that I don't tread on slugs or anything that's around, and move them carefully to the side and stuff. And one thing I do as well is if say I'm planting a tree, digging a hole to plant a tree, what I'll do, rather than just plunging with a spade, what I'll do is I'll loosen the earth with a fork first, so that and then see if there's any worms there, and kind of move them rather than plunging with a spade, and cut the worms in half. So that's a very simple way that I try and avoid, that killing worms and other animals in the soil.
You still do quite a lot of damage with a fork, though, too. Can't
Well,
you?
yeah, but it's not so likely because
Again,
you've only
because
got.
It's kind of
So, you see, so all the time we're trying to,
it's a
avoid our
minimize
best
thing, isn't it?
of
minimize,
harming. Yeah.
So,
But that's interesting, and I think it does show that kind of we need to kind of really respect the soil, and our ways of growing things need to recognize that this soil is a living organism, and that we kind of need to kind of sort of work with that. And once again, this comes back to like organic agriculture, vegan organic agriculture, where we're not putting like artificial fertilizers and we're not using pesticides and stuff like that. And that's obviously much more in accordance with the vegan ethic, because we're minimizing any damage we do to the soil and the structure of the soil and these animals that live in the soil.
Well, the veganic allotment that I had was no dig one anyway, so most of it was done with your hands. So that was
yeah. I
good.
think Elliot's a good comment from Elliot about, if you could put that up, about the large and small animals. Yeah, I think that's right. I think yes. There's no reason to think that because an animal's small that means that they're not sentient. It's just it's harder to avoid harming the smaller ones because they're difficult to see and stuff like that.
I think we also, for some reason, kind of start thinking about size of brain and that kind of stuff, don't we? About when we talk about minute beings,
Yeah, but then you've got animals with very, mammals with really comparatively small brains that are kind of very intelligent. I mean, like rats, for instance. They're very and crows.
That's what I mean. I don't think you can really go by the actual physical size of them. It's kind of it's what's going on. Debbie's saying that swats are In fact, funny enough, it was my laundry day today, and I avoided a couple of ants on the way, because I do that. I tend to kind of look down when you're walking.
Ben Beagle's put, "You two are out of touch." What does that? Can Ben explain what he means by that? Out of touch with what? Be interesting to know if it means us and what we're out of touch with. Because we didn't know about the Beagle demo today, maybe. But the way, if we really want to fundamentally end animal experiments, the way to do that is we have to educate far more people to be vegan, because who's going to actually end animal experiments? Well, it's going to be politicians. If those politicians are speciesist, how are they going to end animal experiments? If we want more anti-speciesist politicians, we've got to create more vegans and get more vegan politicians and more vegans to vote for them. So that's a fundamental way of ending animal experiments, going to the root of the problem.
Well, that is obviously our mantra in a way, because it's always a solution, isn't it? I mean, like just as Donald Watson was talking about, veganism being an overarching kind of philosophy. It is the overarching solution for most, if not all, things, really.
It is what Sophie said.
You're just waiting for Ben to get back.
Yeah. Whether he will or not, I don't know. But I mean, I presume he meant us. It might have been someone else he thought was out of touch. But I'd like to know how I'm out of touch, really. Probably out of touch with modern music and stuff like that, whatever that is.
The modern animal rights movement. Okay. So,
and what is the modern animal rights movement then? What is the modern animal rights movement? Isn't there just one animal rights movement, and that's a movement for animal rights? We want, we want the rights that animals already have to be respected, and that's what we're saying. Isn't that the animal rights movement? And hasn't that always been the case?
Making a music reference there. Well, I guess.
I mean, what is the modern animal? Are we talking about single issues here? Are we talking about?
Oh, it could be the campaign argument.
But the thing is but you see that if we're talking about single issue campaigns, we're talking about campaigns against animal experiments. That isn't the modern animal rights movement. That is actually the old animal rights movement. That's how it was back in the 70s. And what's happening now in terms of these single issue campaigns is just really a continuation of the old movements. The much more modern way of thinking about things is vegan outreach. Try and get to the fundamental reason why all these things happen in the first place. So the modern animal rights movement is much more to do with spreading veganism.
It doesn't rule out working against vivisection either.
But no. I mean, I totally support.
It's when you do the one without the other that's a problem.
Yeah, I totally support anyone that's campaigning to end various forms of the oppression of other animals. But I do feel that those people should include veganism in their message, because speciesism is the fundamental reason why all these things happen. Unless we challenge speciesism and educate, a large number of people to be opposed to it, then we aren't going to end these things, and we're not going to achieve animal liberation. So that has to be, vegan education has to be really part of everything.
Indeed. Well, we might be out of touch, but we're still alive, Ronnie.
We're still yes.
I suppose that's something. And so, well, we got through it all, and in about 90 minutes. So that was
we did well, actually, considering we covered so many topics. We must be kind of speaking more quickly, mustn't we?
or just actually being able to do it properly for once, something like that. So, is there a comment I'm missing here?
Yeah, but like why? Who was your hero, and why no longer your hero? Let's get the answer to that. If there's no more, why's that then? Let's hear it.
Well, presumably because you're not doing AF stuff now.
Well, yeah, but you see, if we're going to go into a discussion about that, the problem is that the ALF achieved a lot and spared millions of animals from from death and suffering, but it was never going to achieve animal liberation because it didn't educate people. Unless we educate a substantial number of people to go vegan, how are we going to get anywhere? We're not, are we? Well, most people believe in human supremacism and are speciesist and aren't vegan. How the hell are we going to achieve animal liberation? How's it going to happen? It's not, is it? So, vegan education has to be like the overriding thing we do. That doesn't mean
there's a real deep irony for me, Ronnie, because I mean, we've said, and you've said that you kind of ended up being the press officer because you kind of had to be, in a way, right? And also, by the time that I became the Northern press officer, there's a lot more damage going on, and so therefore you were getting a lot more attacks from journalists, and so the actual ability to educate in that sense. So if we'd have cottoned on to the importance of vegan education, and use the ALF as a vehicle to get the exposure in the mass media, earlier on, I mean that's the thing that we did wrong. And if we could go back,
I think direct action can be a very, very powerful tool for awareness raising, but it would have to be done in a way that was really quite considerably different to how the ALF did it. I think the structure, structurally, the ALF was great. I think that autonomous, decentralized type of way it worked was absolutely brilliant. and enabled it to spread widely and all that. But I think
I
it was
think
like,
Ben is suggesting that perhaps your focus on veganism at the moment is putting everything else a little
no,
bit in the
yeah,
shade.
but the current attitude to current campaigns, you see, the thing is that what you've got to look at, right, is, yeah, it's great that people are doing these campaigns, but the problem is, unless we educate a large number of people to go vegan, those campaigns aren't really going to achieve a great deal, right? You only have to look at the history of kind of what's happened. So you look at the history of anti-vivisection campaigning. Like, one of the most kind of successful campaigns that we had was the Shack campaign, Stop Hunting and Animal Cruelty. And in a sense, there's a connection between that and Camp Beagle, because, of course, one of the places where the Beagles go to is LabCorp, which was formerly HLS. And there was this campaign, to close HLS, and that was, had a great deal of success in stopping people supplying to that lab, and even created a situation where no bank was willing to offer them banking facilities. And so, but what actually happened was the government stepped in and saved that laboratory, offered them banking facilities with the Bank of England, and kind of then acted to, to put a lot of people in jail, some of them for long periods of time, who were involved in that campaign. That's what happened. That campaign was crushed by the state. And the reason the campaign was crushed by the state, because we have a speciesist, we had then and still have a speciesist administration that wasn't going to give in to people that wanted to end animal experimentation. So unless you do something about changing that administration, the same thing's going to happen again. If you had a campaign that kind of became really successful in stopping animal experimentation, right, then, that's going to happen again, isn't it? Is the state going to step in to protect that industry like they did before?
Well, consider this one then, Ronnie, because I think part of Jake's argument would be that Jake Conroy, the cranky vegan, would be that the stronger vegan education got, it would be the same, and so eventually vegan education would be made illegal. Plus the fact the government already props up things like the dairy industry and everything.
Yeah.
And so
I think the thing about I think it'd be extremely difficult to make vegan education illegal. But you're talking, I think that would be. I'm not saying that, there are probably some that would like to make it illegal, but I think that would be. That would be extremely difficult. And the thing about these animal farming industries are propped up, helped with subsidies. But how are you going to end those subsidies? You're going to only end those subsidies by having different politicians there that will end those subsidies. And how do you get the different politicians?
Yeah, but Ronnie, I think the argument is you're not going to get to there because you'll get stopped before you're there, which is essentially like the Shack. That before
the Shack. But you see, if you've got campaigns that are kind of either people are doing things that are illegal already, or they're bordering on that, so it's not that difficult to kind of make those things unlawful, and that's much easier for the state to act. But if you've got something that is just basically education, then that's going to be much more difficult for them to act against, almost impossible in a way, because like you're kind of it's a very peaceful activity that's kind of would be perceived as that by many people. And so I think I think it would be virtually impossible for them to stop vegan outreach. And so that's why
it's an interesting one, all right. It's an interesting one.
And also it's something that like loads and loads of people can do. Actions that kind of are going to put people at risk in one way or another, of arrest or whatever, are you're going to have a limitation on who can take part in that. But virtually all vegans can take part in outreach and help spread that message. And I think we have to go to the root of the problem. And I think the difficulty is that these campaigns, for whatever merits they've kind of got, kind of don't go to the root of the problem. And the other thing is, say for instance that the campaign succeeded. Camp Beagle succeeded in closing down MBR acres, right? then if you've still got the same demand for animal experiments, those beagles will just be supplied from elsewhere. Already we have beagles flown in from other countries, where they're bred abroad, and so if you still have the same demand for animal experiments, then those dogs are going to be supplied from elsewhere. So just closing down one particular supplier isn't going to make any difference. It's like even closing down HLS probably wouldn't have made any difference, because what would have happened is those companies that relied on Huntington Life Sciences to test their products would just have gone to another contract testing laboratory. So the closure of Huntington Life Sciences would just have benefited other contract testing laboratories.
I think this is a very tricky area for us to talk about, in the sense that there are some activists who they're still in what I kind of call the kind of the old-fashioned way of looking for enemies to fight rather than for people to educate. Because I always say that's kind of like the difference now. We were looking for people to fight. We were looking for businesses to close down. We were looking for things to ban, and now we're looking for people to educate. But I think that if you're still in that mindset, then by saying, well, even if you succeed, it's not doing any good. Because
you see, I think I kind of had a bit of a kind of I don't know what the word is, but I would have something else to say about. I mean, I don't necessarily regard like the Shack campaign as totally a failure, because what we're talking about is like supply and demand. We're talking about, like, if we're really going to spare animals from experiments, we have to reduce the number of experiments, right? You wouldn't do that solely by closing a breeding facility, because of course if the number of animal experiments remain the same, they'll just get the animals from elsewhere, right? But I think that the effect of the Shack campaign probably did reduce the number of experiments on animals to some extent, because of the pressure it put on the industry in general. So I think although Shack failed in its main objective of closing Huntington Life Sciences, I wouldn't say that it was like and I've always maintained that it quite likely probably wasn't a total failure, because the pressure exerted, could well have had an effect of either reducing the number of animal experiments or preventing the number of animal experiments from rising even more. So I'd never class that campaign as a total failure, even though it failed in its main objective. And I think that might be the same in terms of, the campaign against animal experiments in general, even though none of these specific objectives become realized. The general effect of it.
I think it's very difficult. I mean, the one campaign that I've kind of has caused friction between
this idea about Ben thinks we'll never get anyone to go vegan, but like we've the veganism is increasing all the time. The number of people that have gone vegan is increasing all the time, and it's increased. It's increased despite the fact that there's actually been very little outreach. There's been really in compared with what the potential is. The number of the amount of outreach that's occurred has only really been quite small, and yet we've had this really considerable rise in people going vegan. So I think that shows that there's a lot of potential for vegan outreach.
I think we are at the potential side of it, because we've got to accept two facts.
First, and you don't have to you don't have to get everyone to go vegan. See, that's a fallacy. You don't have to get everyone to go vegan. You just have to get enough people to go vegan.
You got to get enough of them, though, haven't you? And so
you got to get you got to get. So you don't have to get 100% people to go vegan, because what will happen is we need to be in a situation where we call the shots, right? And that doesn't mean 100%. I mean, we've got a government in this country that was elected by just 29%, I think, of people eligible to vote, and yet they won the election by a big majority. They're in charge, and what they say goes. And we know that. What they're doing, and it's not very good.
Well, the thing that keeps me positive is two factors. First of all, vegan education is very new historically. It's this century, and secondly, not many people have done it. And so if we can correct that second one and get more people to do it, then we might be onto something pretty good, because we've already seen that even a small amount of people can do it. And then there's a third nuanced factor, which is, this is where we need the inreach, is because it's no good having loads and loads of people doing vegan education if they don't know what veganism is.
Yeah, and that's important. But you see, the thing is that you know, we need to do both outreach and this show. You know, a big factor of this show is inreach, because we know that the vast majority of people that listen to this show are vegan, and so like we're kind of, you know, a lot of it is kind of inreach. We're talking to vegans about veganism and what veganism really is, rather than talking to non-vegans and trying to educate them to become vegan. But you see, the present, you know, the kind of, in a sense, the single issue sort of pressure campaign thing has actually yielded very, very little in terms of preventing the oppression and exploitation of other animals. So all we've got ever is tiny crumbs from the table. You know, what we got, you know, all the pressure of all the years that's happened. All right, yeah, you know, you could say there's been a reduction in animal experimentation, but we've still got, like, you know, almost 3 million of those every year here in the UK. Yeah, fur farms were abolished, but fur still allowed to be imported and sold. And we've got a hunt ban that doesn't work, isn't enforced, is very weak and isn't enforced. You know, and you know, when we consider that we've got, just for the food industry, we have 50,000, well, worldwide it's 50,000 animals slaughtered every second. You know, for the UK, it's probably like 250 every second, 8 billion a year. You know, the amount of animals that have been spared through pressure campaigning is like tiny. It's crumbs from the table. And so we should be thinking, after all the years, are we doing something wrong? You know, is that really the right approach? You know, to actually sparing the maximum number of animals, because we've not done very well with it. You know, whereas I think vegan education does offer the hope of doing that. And the idea of, like, us going soft isn't that we've gone soft. You know, we've always wanted animal liberation. It's just that we've learned from experience, and we've thought about things, we've analysed things, you know, and come to the conclusion that in order to achieve animal liberation, we have to do things rather differently than what we used to do. You know, that's all that's happened. It's just through thinking about stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's a more kind of rounded understanding of things like supply and demand, because I think we thought that we could kind of really smash the supply side, but then, you know, there's all kinds of structural problems to that, not least the one that you mentioned, Ronnie, which is the fact that you'll get a speciesist government and a culture piling loads and loads of money and resources into it, not only to prop it up, but also to arrest everybody that's against it. And so that's a major problem with it. It'll never get that far. And we've got such a globalized system now. And the example I always give, which we haven't mentioned yet, is the closing down fur farms, which are always suggested as a major victory. And in terms of their effect, that they're almost useless. And that's the sad reality of it. I mean, I get no kind of pleasure in saying that. It's just that it's kind of like moving the pieces around on a global chessboard. That's what you do. And the argument against my argument would be, yeah, but then you go and kind of close it down there. So, you know, you finish the fur farms in Britain, then you go to Europe. But when they're all in Russia and China, I don't think many of the activists are going to be moving to Russia and China in order to take down the fur farms there, because that's going to be a totally concentrated business by then. If that's only in the globe where the fur farms are, still the same amount, but they're all in the same place.
If we ask the question, why do fur farms exist, then the answer is because there's a demand because people want to wear fur. So until you tackle that demand, you're not going to do anything about it. You see, it's the same with, you know, why do we have animal farming? Because there's a demand for it. Why do we have animal experiments? Because there's a demand for it. Until we tackle the demand, that isn't going to, nothing very much is going to change.
Yeah, which is why a demo outside a fur shop is better than closing down a fur farm. I mean, in Ireland, for example, the fur shops in Dublin, they don't get fur from the Irish fur farms. So there's a total disconnection between the two things anyway. You know, and
Yeah,
so
but you see that, but you're once again talking about education. You see, we've had examples over here of companies that of companies that sell fur, or they include fur in their garments. I mean, for instance, there's Canada Goose, there's been flannels, for instance, these chain stores, and there's been people demonstrating outside their stores, right? And of course, what happens is that makes the store worry. Well, look, people aren't going to come into our store and spend money because these people outside have educated us about educate those people out fur. So basically, that is an educational campaign. You're educating people that that company sells fur and what the fur involves, and basically encouraging those people to not go in the store. You see, so that's actually an educational campaign. If you see what I mean. And we had the same. I was involved in the campaign for many years with Louise against the dog racing industry, and yeah, you know, there were people outside the dog tracks. Demonstrations outside the dog tracks we used to hold and encourage people to do. And so people think, oh yeah, pressure campaign, you're putting pressure on those tracks to close. But it kind of wasn't really. It was primarily an educational campaign, because what it was doing was educating people going into those tracks about what happens to the dogs, and saying to those people, look, you know, don't go to the dog racing, don't bet on it, because when you do that, this is what results and this is what happens to the dogs. And so it was a campaign of education, and it was very, very successful because of that, you see. And once again, that's an example of the sort of triumph of education. You know, a lot of these places closed down because people were educated about what happened and said, right, I'm not going to go anymore, you know. So we've got to kind of make a distinction. Sometimes things look like a pressure campaign when really they're a campaign of education.
although that would be a single issue education campaign in
It's
a
a
way.
single issue education campaign, but you see, one thing we did, and what I do encourage all single issue campaigns to do is on the front page of our website, we had a big section about encouraging people to go vegan, and it said, you know, yeah, greyhound racing isn't the only way that other animals are oppressed and exploited by humans, and if you want to, if you want to, you know, oppose all of it and not be part of any of it, then this is what you do. And it was about going vegan, and we had that there on, you know, and we even in our leaflets we had a section like that in our leaflets that took someone to, you know, to a web page that promoted veganism. So what I'd say to people, look, you know, I'm not saying to stop the single issue campaigns, you know, if that's what you want to do, but include an element of vegan education in what you're doing, because that is fundamentally how we end these things.
Yeah, well, I guess the stumbling block there is when you're trying to get non-vegans involved in the campaign. So you've got that tension which didn't exist in the past, because I don't suppose, you know, if people turned up for an anti-vivisection demo or would turn up for, say, Camp Beagle existed back there, nobody in the 70s and 80s would have kind of made a big fuss about whether they're vegan or not. Might not even ask them, right? Whereas now, because of the centrality of veganism, that's created a kind of a problem which didn't exist before.
I think those people are still welcome to go along. I mean, you know, one really good thing about Camp Beagle is it's a lot of people have gone there as non-vegans and become vegan by rubbing shoulders with vegans that are already there.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is some strategists would say you should de-emphasize descent of veganism in order to get non-vegans to go, and they don't feel threatened and everything, and so it might still work that they still rub shoulders and all that. It's just that would go against the idea of having a statement about veganism on the website or on the leaflets or anything.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that would actually deter people from getting
I
involved in
think
the
that's part of
campaign.
the argument, though, Ronnie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's part of the argument, but I don't really accept it, because what you're talking about in the campaign is still primarily about the kind of on the single issue, isn't it? You're just including that section about educating people to go vegan, and you're doing it in a way. You're not saying, why aren't you vegan? You should be vegan. You're not doing it like that. You're just pointing out to trying to get people to make the connection. They're against one form of the oppression of other animals, so make the connection and be against all of it. That's kind of what you're
Actually,
saying.
that'd be actually a really interesting sociological research thing, to actually interview the vegans at Camp Beagle and also the non-vegans at Camp Beagle, and see where the tensions are, see all that. Now, this is an area that might be quite interesting to end with, Ronnie, because ever asked in prison, are there anything that they try to talk to you about, and why you should have done what you did in prison? I got one. I do remember getting called into a Screw's office on the wing once, because you used to get a lot of magazines sent in, and I would be getting kind of Animal Aid magazines, the RSPCA magazine. People just send you anything that was animal related, because they think you'd be interested in it and everything. And this guy goes, look, if you by getting all this stuff through the post, it looks like you're still involved, and so you're ruining your chances of parole. And I said, well, these groups are just kind of welfare groups. And he said, well, you might know that, and I might know that, but the parole board's not going to know it. And so you're taking a chance. If you keep having these things sent in, you're taking a chance of extending the time that you're inside. And so I said, well, I think I'll take the chance. The only thing I did do, I think I got my name took off the support list, just to minimize the amount of stuff that was coming. I think, not to stop it, but to kind of cut it down a bit. So that was my experience. So did anybody talk to you about how naughty you'd been on the outside?
Well, basically, on my first sentence, I was in with another chap who was kind of, he was older than me, and he was kind of more, kind of an ordinary person than me, in a sense. You see what I mean? I was kind of like an anarchist, and I didn't really have a regular job and stuff, but he had this regular kind of steady job. He was much more conventional than me, and he found it a lot harder to cope in prison than me. And there was this guy there who was a social worker type guy, who was like a Christian, and he used to get me in the office and sort of blame me, say, your friend who's here is really struggling in prison, and that's your fault. It's your fault for getting him involved. You see, and he was trying to blame me for the fact that this other guy was having a more difficult time. And I said, no, what are you talking about? I said, the guy's older than me. He's got his own mind. It was his decision whether to do what he did or not. What the hell? What the hell are you blaming me for? It's a load of nonsense, And he was trying to get me into God and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of, one thing I didn't like about prisoners, they're kind of, these religious people kind of prey. They sort of prey on prisoners because, they see prisoners as like in a kind of vulnerable situation. And so, you get like the God squad move in and try and kind of get them to God and that. And he was a bit the same, but I wasn't having any of it, of course. But that was the main thing. And that happened on my first sentence. Kind of apart from that, I can't really think of anything, to be honest.
What about this bit then? Because this couldn't have really happened in a way, because vegan education wasn't really.
No, they didn't. No, I mean, they said they recommend that they did recommend that I stop doing direct action, but they didn't really say what I should do instead.
No, and of course, I mean, the interesting thing for me is that I think my kind of image was a bit more, much more peripheral than yours, Roddy. You were involved with the action much more than me, right? At least that's what the evidence suggested. And so you kind of go with that and say, well, I was just a spokesperson. I didn't do the action. That ended up being my story. You couldn't quite carry that off, but I could.
No.
Yeah. And so I kind of got away with that. And so in some senses, they didn't see me as returning to direct action because they didn't think I was that involved in the first place. So I think that's the answer to that one.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't get a lot of discussion about things. I think they realised there weren't much point in me. I kind of, in
No
a
point
sense,
in talking to you.
No, in a sense, by all these kind of sociologists and the different ones you get in prison, they didn't treat me like your standard prisoner, because they knew that I was in for like a kind of for a sort of philosophical belief. In a sense, it wasn't like a crime of where I was looking to gain something or kind of it was done for some
Elliot's saying,
personal
was there a program set up or something?
No,
no, not really. No.
Yeah, I think there was for some prisoners, but I was never asked to take part in anything like that.
No, but I mean, also, I mean, like you, I suppose in some ways you risked and you probably did damage your, or did you get out at the first opportunity you could get out, or did you?
I did on my first sentence.
No, but what about the 10?
No, I did the full amount. No, I did 6 years and 8 months.
And that was because of this, so in a way, wasn't it? The fact that you were still seen as involved and all that.
What they did at the time is that, and I think it may still be the case on longer sentences, that you kind of, the standard was that you served 2/3 of your sentence, and the remaining third was kept for if you misbehaved in prison or broke prison rules, they could add more on. And so the third was called remission. You had a remission on your sentence of a third, but if you broke prison rules and stuff, you could lose remission. In other words, you could serve in prison up to your total amount, right? But then there was also
you get some stuff added on, wouldn't you? So
you can't. Well, if you committed like a further crime in prison, you could be taken to court and have stuff added. But if you just sort of told the governor to fuck off or something, which I've known guys do that. Normally the homeless guys would do that to try and stay in prison longer. You'd have time, you'd lose some of that remission. So instead of doing 2/3, you might.
Some of the homeless lads that I knew, right, they said that around Christmas time they'd go into the police station and say, if you don't nick me, I'm going to go and smash a few windows.
Yeah. There was a guy.
They needed to be in prison over Christmas.
Yeah, there was a guy. One prison I was in, it was this guy. He was a Scottish guy, which everyone called Jock. Surprise, surprise. And he's a homeless guy, and he'd done something when it was coming to winter. He'd done something to get put in jail, but he didn't get as long as he wanted. You see, so he was due to be released round about end of January, February, and it was still cold. So he wanted to kind of,
fair weather prisoners.
That was 2/3 of his sentence, but he wanted to be able to do the other third and stay in longer. So he made an appointment to see the governor, and the governor said, "Oh, what have you come to see me about?" And he said, "I've, come to see you to tell you you're a bastard, you're an arsehole, and he used every single swear word at the governor. But the governor just said, "Well, I know what your game is. I'm not going to I'm not going to make you stay longer in prison. I'm just going to put you in the punishment block, and then you'll be released on the normal day you were going to be released." So it didn't actually work for poor old Jock.
No.
But then as soon as he went out, he could have just smashed the window and he'd put back straight back in.
This is just because they're institutionalized, aren't they? That's the thing.
Yeah. But also because, if someone's, homeless, then, over the cold winter months, they probably think, well, they're better off in jail. And there were really quite a lot like that.
Yeah, some pretty sad cases, I suppose. Well, folks, we've done 2 hours, which we've not.
Yeah, we have. It's kind of gone on longer than we. I thought we were nearly finished at 1.5 hours, and we started talking about something else, didn't we?
We certainly did. Well, you didn't like the idea of being called a has-been, Ronnie. That's what it was. So,
well, no, I'm used to it, but people really say that when they don't understand, they kind of don't understand the sort of.
I think what they should do in relation to you even more than me, I think, is they should acknowledge that they might not agree with the conclusion you've drawn after you've thought about it, but they shouldn't deny that you've thought about it, very carefully about about all this, because and kind of thought, well, think in terms of what's for the future, what's the best, and all that kind of stuff. They shouldn't just put that down to you going soft as though you're scared or something. It's the fact that you've done that analysis that you talked about. And I think they ought to be. I think they ought to be kind of more giving on that one.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we all want is animal liberation, and it's a question of working out. We need to think about what we do. This is an emotional subject, and it is very upsetting. Horrendously. What happens to the other animals, and it's something that does create understandably high emotion. But if we're going to kind of achieve animal liberation, we've got to think carefully. We've got to analyze the best way by which we do that. We just can't be rushing, controlled by our emotions. If we're thinking about this, like say we're thinking about it as a kind of war. I know it's not a war involving violence, but you have to think the strategy and tactics. You can't just dive in. You got to think about, what is the best strategy by which we kind of achieve animal liberation, and that's what I've tried to do. That's what I've tried to do, and that's why I've come to the conclusion that I've come to.
Yeah, and of course, the interesting thing, I suppose, is that we've both come to the same conclusion, looking at the same evidence, essentially. I think so.
Well, I think it's the only conclusion if you kind of think about things rationally and sort of look at how society works, and also learn from the history of the movement and the history of the struggle. I think it's the only conclusion you can come to, really.
Yeah, at the same time, you don't want to be suggesting that the pressure campaigners are irrational either. It's just
no, I don't suggest. I think there's all sorts of positive things that people do for other animals, and I think I wouldn't say pressure campaigns don't achieve anything. I think they have achieved a certain amount. Animal rescue, support animal rescue. We both of us have supported these campaigns. I've raised hundreds of pounds for hunt saboteurs. Now hunt saboteurs, they're saving individual animals. They're not dealing with the fundamental cause of the problem, but it's still a worthy thing to do. We've supported rescues. We did a whole series of shows to raise money for animal rescues. Now, rescues don't go to the fundamental cause of the problem, do they? They're kind of just treating the refugees, aren't they, from the refugees of speciesism, in a sense. You see, but it's still a worthy thing to do, and it's still something that's worthy of support, and the people that do it are worthy of praise for doing it. But the thing is, none of these things go to the fundamental reason why we're in the situation we are. And I think whatever else people are doing in terms of campaigning for other animals, in terms of defending, protecting other animals, unless we have a sufficient amount of vegan education, we aren't going to achieve animal liberation, because we're not dealing sufficiently with the root cause of the problem. And that's what I say. It's not that these things, there's anything wrong with all these things that people are doing. It's just that without enough vegan education, we really aren't going to get very far.
Yeah, well, going to the root is the issue. It's the same with animal rights versus animal welfare. Going to the root is preferable, in my view. So, people, I'd like to say thanks very much for sticking with us. We're 2 hours and 10 minutes in, so it's way past our bedtime now.
Oh, it is, yeah.
And
yeah.
and I need to visit my soft pillow for my soft head. So we shall be back next week with another show, providing, Ronnie,
we are both still alive.